Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to this HDI webinar, Following the Leaders, a panel discussion on making enterprise service management work. Today's webinar is sponsored by Team Dynamics. And you can follow HDI on social media, of course. HDI is on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on the special members site, HDI Connect. It's free to connect there. And there's also a podcast available on iTunes and SoundCloud. I have a few housekeeping announcements for you before we get started. If you have any technical difficulties during today's session, simply hit F5 or refresh your webcast console. If you do need assistance in solving a common issue, please click on the yellow help icon below the slides. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the discussion. We'll answer as many as possible during the Q&A session that will follow the main presentation, but please feel free to send in your questions at any time. To do so, just type the question into the Q&A window on the side of your screen and hit submit. Today's presentation will be available on demand shortly after the completion of the live event, and you'll receive an email reminder when it's available. You may also download the slides in the resource list section. And while you're in the resource section, please take advantage of a couple of documents you have in there as well, one from Team Dynamics, one from HDI, which has some previous research on enterprise service management. To help us discover more on this topic, we have with us today from the higher education sector, Sabi Varai, CIO at Clackamas County Community College in Oregon. That's a lot of C's in there. Clackamas Community College in Oregon. From the retail sector, we have Nick Farthing, Director of Project Services at Raymour & Flanigan Furniture and Mattresses. And from the solution provider perspective, we have Andrew Graff, the Chief Product Strategist at Team Dynamics. So now I'll go to each of you and ask you to tell us a little bit more about your role and your organization. And let's start with Sabi.
Absolutely. Thank you, Roy. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My full name is Sarabjit Singh Vadach, but I want to keep it simple, so go by Sabi. Or you can say spicy or Sabi, Wasabi, however that works for you. I'm the Chief Information Officer and Dean of Technology at Clackamas Community College. So yes, there are a lot of C's, so that's why we say CCC, so triple C's. The team here within Clackamas Community College, we have about close to 1,000 employees, more than 25,000 students or so. We have 3 campuses here serving a lot of students. We have, I will say, multiple programs all the way from IT services, IT classes, nursing, automobile, anything related, agriculture. So a lot of different needs meeting the needs of the students here in state of Oregon.
Great, thank you, Sabi. Nick, how about you?
Hi, good afternoon. Contrary to what it may say on the slide, my name is not Donna Knapp. My name is actually Nick Farthing, and I'm Director of Project Services with Raymour & Flanigan Furniture and Mattress. We're the largest furniture retailer in the northeastern United States. We operate about 165 locations in addition to that throughout 7 states. We're headquartered in the Syracuse, New York area. We've got between 6,500 and 7,000 employees. Our largest store is our website, and we manage the entire life cycle of our product from where it comes in overseas, across the ocean into port, and we own all of our fleet, warehousing, delivery, last mile. So very large company. My responsibilities really are the oversight of the project management office. I also manage the IT finance office. Many organizations where IT is always one of the large budget line items. We actually have a finance office within IT. I'm also the chair of our change advisory board, or commonly referred to as change management. and also the daily triage, where we look at non-standard service requests and project requests that come through. And then every IT manager's favorite is other duties is assigned by our leadership. Also worth mentioning that, and we're a Team Dynamics customer, but also worth mentioning, I spent about 10 years working in academia, in which I was a Team Dynamics customer while I was in charge of the project management office at Ithaca College.
Thank you, Nick. And I just wanted to say that it's not that we don't like Donna Knapp. We love Donna, but you are definitely not Donna. Okay. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your role at Team Dynamics.
Yeah, sure. So Andrew Graff, I'm Chief Product Officer here at Team Dynamics, and my role is pretty simple when you boil it down. It's really just to listen to the market, the customers, evaluate trends and things like enterprise service management, automation, service management, and project portfolio management, and then make sure that we set our product strategy in such a way that we feel like we'll meet and exceed the expectations of the market and customer base. So that's really my role in a nutshell. I'm glad to be here.
And we are glad to have you. So I'm just going to start this off by quoting a little bit of research from Omdia, which is an Informa company. According to recent insights from them, there is serious strategic intent from organizations to invest in enterprise service management, or ESM, as we commonly call it, demonstrating that the practice is no longer just an aspiration for many organizations, but is becoming a reality. As ESM becomes a strategic reality for more organizations, they look to those who have already achieved success for guidance and inspiration. So overall, what we're going to be driving toward today, and the questions that I have for the panelists, is kind of getting our handle on what does success look like when we talk about enterprise service management. So to start off, I'm going to kind of look into how enterprise service management has evolved in your organizations. So Sabi, could you tell us a little bit about that evolution and your service management practices, and how mature was your program, and how did you know how mature it was?
You know, it's easy to answer how mature it is, because when there are silos within the organization, right, there is no oversight of those service deliveries. You know that there is, your maturity is, I won't say below zero, but absolutely at zero. When you're not able to provide that customer value, or that customer value is delayed, and there is, a customer is submitting ticket and you don't know where that ticket is, it goes into a black hole. There is no service owner employed in the organization, then you know that maturity is not there. So that's where we started. We had we started around December 2018, 2019. And one of the biggest driver for that was the complaints from the end users and the customers saying, we don't know when we submit our tickets, what services you provide, do you have a service catalog? And the tool which we were using at that time was really painful, right? It was a hard-coded tool. If you had to make a change in that tool, you have to bring in a programmer to make even a smaller change, right? So at the same time, we were also looking at not only from IT service management, but also project and portfolio management perspective as well, where we can marry those two, and started looking at some options around there. And that's where TDX came in, and we'll talk more about that at, later during those questions. But that's where the journey started.
Great, thank you. And Nick, tell us a little bit about how you got started, how mature, and how you know whether you're mature or not.
Well, when I started at Raymore and Flanigan in September 2018, and I would say that the acronyms of ITIL and ITSM were very unfamiliar to the organization. I actually started identifying the opportunities during the interviewing process, unbeknownst to the folks that ended up hiring me. So I had a pretty good understanding of what they did not have, and the lack of maturity that they had in service management, both within IT and across the enterprise, before I even started there. Knowing that and proving it are two vastly different things. And so one of the things I started right when I came to work with Raymore was I did an ITIL benchmark and gap analysis of the IT department. And my findings pretty much proved what I had speculated, that the maturity level for service management within IT was very low, and they were in desperate need of immediate measures to make some improvements. So I got to work very early on, and really my background in service management tells me that it doesn't matter if you're an academic organization or an enterprise organization, you need this. And regardless of what tools you may have in place right now, they can be improved upon. So every organization needs this. And again, what I found was, then I had to prove it. So I had to do some fairly extensive research and provide that back to the organization to actually show them how bad things were. And from there, I was able to just write up a pretty serious proposal about where you start and how you scale this type of a service across the enterprise. And I started an educational process. And once I got some buy-in, I was able to start making some movement on it.
And since you brought up that part of your approach, Nick, I'm going to stay with you, and then I'll go back to Sabi for an adjacent question. You started moving outward from IT. You say that, ITIL and ITSM weren't familiar terms. You started using those practices more. How did you start your ESM journey from pushing it out from IT? Tell us a little bit more about that particular initiative.
Sure. I had a background in service management before I had come here. And knowing that I was coming into a very large organization, I knew that it would be ripe for service management. And what I ended up finding, I should back up. So we finished our ITSM, our MVP of our ITSM implementation back in the fourth quarter of 2020, and started making plans for now our scale into service management. So, as a large retail and enterprise organization, we have a lot of departments here, all of which, in my opinion, at minimum need a service catalog and a ticketing application. So most organizations, when I look at them, whether academic or enterprise, what I call generic business offices are the ones that are most ripe for these opportunities, those being human resources, legal, facilities management, things like that, departments which generally provide a lot of services to employees. So, but rather than go to the obvious suspects, I found here at Raymour & Flanigan, since we operate so many locations, we have an in-house developed property management or facilities management application. So I started looking at that because it's basically a ticketing application where our locations that we have our showrooms and warehouses in, but we also have tenants that are at our own locations. So where they provide us service requests to say they need the snow removed or the grass mowed, or perhaps they have an incident like the HVAC is not working or there's a plumbing problem. So this system is a ticketing application basically. And the technician force is a group of third-party contractors of HVAC companies, electricians, plumbers, all throughout the 7 states that we operate in. So right now I'm in a process of doing a proof of concept with our facilities, or what we call the management group, and we're going to do a one-to-one build of basically a knockoff of our previously in-house developed application. So that's going to be our proof of concept. Everyone in the company is familiar with that, so we'll be able to use that as a vehicle to socialize and showcase the power of Team Dynamics from an ITSM and to just an enterprise service management platform, and use those as use cases to educate our enterprise about the capabilities.
Great, thank you so much. Now, not every organization starts from IT and moves outward. According to the last research that HDI did on enterprise service management, HDI did 2 studies, one in 2014, one in 2018, to see the kind of progression that enterprise service management was getting, and hopefully HDI will be able to follow up with that at some point. But Sabi, let me ask you this. Did your initiative also start with IT, or did it start somewhere else? About 26% of organizations said that they started with C-level non-IT people. So tell us more about how you got started.
Absolutely. The big thing which really helped us in making this a successful was the sponsor of this project. The sponsor for this project was VP of College Services, Vice President of College Services. So when you look into the education sector, it's divided into two parts. You have college services and then faculty side and everything else around that. So under college services, it's finance reports to the college services, facilities report, HR reports, IT reports. So from the very beginning, what we saw was a lot of buy-in coming from IT, HR, media team, marketing, media and marketing, and then institutional research. So those were the four big pillars which said, okay, we have been struggling with this system for so long, we need to move forward. And once the Vice President of College Services became the sponsor, I think the champion really put her effort behind it and making it a successful. So that was a big, positive plus, which pushed all four up front. And since then, we have been adding more and more departments or services onto the system recently because, COVID happened and then everything slowed down during that. And then we are picking it up again. So recently, about a month ago, facilities went live and they are on this online learning also went live. And now another of the group is also coming on board. So we are in the process of continuous service improvement and continuous building upon it. So within the next 3 to 4 months, we have 7 to 8 different service groups will be online.
Great, thank you. And we've talked a little bit about whether we realize it or not, people and process. Let's get to the technology a little bit, and I'll ask all of you a quick question on this one. Nick, what about your technology were you concerned about? Did you go seeking new technology? What were you looking for in the technology to be able to enable enterprise service management at Raymond & Flanigan?
Yeah, the technology was the first place that we really looked at. And, coming, as I mentioned, starting in IT, I was looking at the systems that we had in place there. We had an outdated asset management that also had ticketing application built into it. And we had every developer's either favorite or bane of existence in Jira. And then a massive Excel spreadsheets and email. So it was really kind of messy in terms of the technology. So I knew that we needed something on a modern technology stack, ideally in a hosted application. And then as far as the actual applications within the platform, that I think we'll get into a little bit further down the line here today. But I was looking for very specific IT service management and enterprise service management applications within the platform that we were selecting.
Great, thank you. And Sabi, how about you? What were you looking for, and where did you start with the technology?
Right. So as I mentioned earlier, we were looking at two pieces, ID service management and also at the project and portfolio management. So if we're looking at ID service management, we're looking at a ticketing system, a change management, some kind of asset discovery kind of a tool which can do that. And at the same time, from project portfolio management perspective, we were looking at a tool which can do intake. It can go through the whole project lifecycle. There should be some project portfolio in terms of governance of those projects should be built in. So those were the two things. And also another piece which we were looking at was the knowledge base. We were seeing the folks solving same problems, different individuals solving the same problems, and not a centralized system where you can build that knowledge base and learn from each other. So those were the big things which we were looking at. And, and that's where TDX came into the picture and solved both the problems at the same time.
Great. Well, following right on top of that, Andrew, this is a good place for you to jump in. And my question to you is, sure, how does an organization know if their tool is equal to the tasks of ESM? I mean, because obviously there's going to be a lot more involved than just IT. That's the whole point, is everybody across the organization, or at least as many as possible, are going to be involved. What should they be looking for when they start their enterprise service management journey?
Yeah, that's a great point. So, great question. There's a couple things that we see, I think, the best organizations look for. That as they're going out, most of the organizations, I think, approach this really well. They identify the pains in the organization. So they look to see the departments that have high request volumes, right, where people are fielding these requests manually or via email or Excel, right? They're getting poor feedback from their customers, so that there's a recognized need. Okay, and then laying out what do we want to accomplish. So what are the things we need to be able to do? What, do we need forms that are customizable, because each type of request this department fields is going to be unique? Do we need self-service? Is this the type of organization that wants their people to self-service? So do we need knowledge? Do we need service request catalog? Thinking about the key components. And then what I think is critical is saying, all right, can each department have their own configurations unique to them? Where we have seen these initiatives fail is when IT takes their tool that talks about incidents, problem, changes, releases, and forces that upon the rest of the organization, where they manage cases, or they manage work orders. Whatever it is, allowing the tool to adapt to their verbiage and nomenclature has been critical. They don't want to see IT's tickets. IT doesn't want to see facilities tickets or HRs and vice versa. So having the ability to create these spaces that are uniquely configured for each of these departments is key, but then also having the ability to collaborate between them, because sometimes, for example, a request for onboarding that comes through HR has facilities ramifications, it has IT ramifications. So thinking about how can the tool support these unique departments and their particular processes without having to have another department's processes forced upon them. I think that's key. Another consideration is how hard is it to administer? So what we're finding is, while IT has a lot of expertise in service management, we often see the ITIL constructs as transcending lots of different types of services that can be provided, not just IT. So IT is typically out there helping these departments get up and running. What becomes burdensome is if IT has to continue to maintain the tool that they configured for these other departments, because then all that happens is that other department comes and talks to IT and says, hey, we need you to make changes to our forms, et cetera. So I think another key component of this is it easy to maintain for that department itself? So IT doesn't need to have that burden, right? IT can come in, be a hero. Here's a tool for you. It'll meet your needs. We'll help you get set up and running. But now you can own it, right? I think that's another key consideration, because if you're wildly successful with enterprise service management, IT could be managing 30 or 40 applications that are being built to manage services for different departments. So that's just something to think about in the back of your mind. You don't want to be the victim of your own success, because then it becomes a job you necessarily didn't intend to do.
Those are all excellent points, and I would reiterate, the language is incredibly important. The example that I usually use is that an incident means something entirely different to HR than it does to IT. Mm-hmm. When you talk to HR about an incident, they want to know who fell down, who went off the roof of a building, who got, and it's a totally different ball game. So the language really does matter. Thank you. Mm-hmm. So, did you get buy-in from leadership? We talked a little bit about that. Were your leaders bought in right from the beginning, or did you have to go back and try to interest them in doing this? How did you go about convincing them to get involved? And Sabi, I'm going to start with you. You talked about the VP of college getting involved and being a sponsor for you. So tell us about how you convinced them to do that.
Right. So what we have is we have a leadership cabinet, and leadership cabinet includes VP of college services and VP of instructions, and then they report to the college president, and under each of those are the deans, right? So the dean for both the different divisions. So this project was brought in at the leadership cabinet level and got the buy-in from everybody. That was such an important piece for doing that. And during that process, there were some risks which were clearly identified and communicated out, saying, okay, we are looking, education sector like community college is always lean, right? We don't have those resources available. We're all also very slow in adapting to the change, and not only adapting, we might see people actually reacting negatively to change. There are some processes which are rarely documented. So what we were looking for was some kind of a tool where we can improve our processes. It's not a heavy burden, and then it's easy to use. If it makes it very complicated, we'll have a big learning curve, and that will really get we won't get the buy-in as needed. So those were some of the key things which really helped in identifying some of the key pain points and saying, how can we resolve those pains and get buy-in from everybody? And once we said, okay, these are the pain points, and this is the solution which will help us ease those pains, the buy-in was there.
Great. And Nick, can you speak to that? How did you get your senior leadership involved?
Yeah, I'd say I'll discuss it from both sides. So when I was in academia, very similar to when I came to Raymour and Flanigan, I recognized that we had inadequate tools and processes in place to provide service management to the institution at large. I had collaborated with some of my peers and leaders within IT, and we requested funding for it for a few years, and we never really got the funding. And we did have a change in our senior leadership in IT, and we were fortunate to have a gentleman that joined us as our CIO who had a pretty strong background in service management. So he and I hit it off pretty well. And I'll just say at Ithaca College, one of the drivers that got it moving was, getting senior leadership, but it was getting them to fund my project. And I did it by publicly shaming them at an administrative assembly with the entire campus community there. I stood up and said, you've denied us funding for the last 3 years, and I need it. And next thing you know, we got it. So, but it was through those conversations I kind of forced their hand at the college to greenlight the funding. Here at Raymour and Flanigan, it was a little bit different. I was really working towards a foreign concept. And we're a private family-owned business. So at that time when I came to work here, after I finished my gap analysis, I wrote up a proposal, and I sat down with, at the time, who I reported to, who now is the president of the company, took over as the presidency a few months ago. So I started working on him and got his buy-in and my CIO's buy-in early on. And that meant everything. If you could have executive leadership behind you, you can start to move things forward more effectively. It doesn't also account for the amount of education that has to be done of the next level down so that they understand what is service management, whether it's at the enterprise or the IT level. So you need the executive leadership, but you also need to have the people to understand exactly what they're signing up for.
Thank you. And Andrew, since you deal with multiple organizations, of course, how have you seen some organizations approach this difficulty, if it's difficult, or the issue of attracting their senior leadership to enterprise service management and convincing them that it's worth doing?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's a couple things that we see in the space, and I'll talk about a few approaches that we've seen to be effective. The first, and this is assuming you don't have senior leadership who's hook, line, and sinker bought into service management initiatives across the enterprise. So paying really close attention to the senior leadership's goals or pains and tying the initiatives to these big objectives, whether that's cutting costs, it's improving customer satisfaction, it's improving the uptime of your services across the organization. There's usually a way to tie a enterprise service management initiative to these strategic objectives. And there's plenty of research out there to support how much time and money is saved with proper service management, et cetera. So aligning it with key pains that are front and center with the senior leadership team seems to be effective. Now, there's another approach to this where if there are specific departments that have pain, HR is one that's very common, heavy request load, often don't have tools. They have complex business processes that are error prone. It's easy to sometimes go to these departments where you know there's an issue and convince them of the virtues of service management and then implement on a smaller scale. So essentially you build support by showing results department by department. So that's another approach that we've seen to be effective, where the VP of HR says, we're getting slaughtered in this area. I have to improve my cost structure. I have to improve service to the employees of this organization. We need help, right? So you can build a business case. And then what we've seen there is once that organization is successful, marketing them. So going out to the rest of the organization and say, look what HR was able to accomplish with a better request management and service management mechanism. And what that tends to do is allow other business leaders to say, wow, okay, that's pretty interesting. Maybe that could work for me. So you build that buy-in department by department where there's the biggest pronounced pain. And then you use that as a marketing platform for the rest of the organization. So there's just a couple things we've seen to be highly effective.
Great. Thank you so much. And while we're talking about people from other parts of the organization, let's dive into that a little bit. Sabi, I'll start with you. Did you integrate representatives from the other lines of business to give you insights and information about what they really needed to have, what was specific to them? And if not, how did you collect that intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did was we made it a project, an official project, and then we had a project manager, and then we had subject matter experts who were from these different lines of businesses who were part of this project. And they were those basically eyes and ears for those particular lines of businesses, providing that insight to us, saying, hey, these are the things this is our language. This is how we communicate, and how are you going to make it happen? So that really helped us to engaging those SMEs as part of the conversations. And also those SMEs later became the trainers, and they were responsible for training the end users in their own groups. So that's a strategy which we used at CCC.
Great, thank you. And Nick, how about your organization? Oop, you're muted.
You're on mute, Nick.
I had a quick lockup on my PC, so I missed a little bit of the question. If you don't mind repeating it for me, Roy, I'm sorry.
Sure. That's fine. Since enterprise service management by definition involves other parts of the organization, did you involve representatives from those different lines of business as you began the process? And if not, how did you get the intelligence about what they specifically needed?
When we sought out on the original implementation, and I caught the end of the last response here, we did it similar. We started off as a project. It was run through our PMO led by a project manager, and that was for the IT side of it. But what we did there, we did not really include the business stakeholders in our evaluation for the different vendors, but we did a cross-section of IT. So what we're doing now, as I mentioned earlier, with our IT implementation and what we're doing with our proof of concept for the building services, I'll be taking those on the roadshow and going around and meeting with the individual department leaders to show them these two builds. One thing that we've also done to include them in that, again, it all comes down to education for me. The more we can have people engaging with the platform and understanding how it works, the easier it is for me to provide use cases back to them about their own departments and how we can solve problems with the platform. And so what I've done, and I've collaborated with a few folks in the enterprises, we've set up product teams or agile teams, depending on how you look at it, for each one of our business units. So now what we're doing is we're creating queues where our most senior leaders within the business, when someone sends a service request into IT, it's hitting a senior vice president's dashboard, and they're actually looking at it. They're the ones who are establishing the priority, or they're the ones that are saying, we don't want to bother IT with this. So we now have some of our business units managing their IT capacity through Team Dynamics. And to me, that's a great thing. But what's also a byproduct of that is these senior leaders are also understanding how to manage capacity how to manage service requests, how to manage incidents, and apply that to their own business units. So after I get through with this education, now we can actually sit down and talk and have a very intellectual conversation about how we can solve problems using Team Dynamics within their business units. And that's by the experience they get managing their own work that IT does for them. So it's kind of a sneaky way of going about it. It's all about engagement and education for me.
Great, thank you. And Andrew, how have you seen other organizations do this? Do they typically involve all the different lines of business to try to get a handle on what those specific processes and problems and the languages we were just talking about is, or do they kind of retrofit it as they go and implement things? What do you think?
Well, okay, so if IT is branching out, right, with into these other groups, you know, often you're taking a look at your tool set, determining does it meet the needs for an ESM initiative to start, and then you might need to make a platform change if not. But then once again, if the executive sponsorship is coming from the top, then yes, more departments are going to be involved. If you're looking at the department by department basis, you know, it's hard unless the director is coming to the top. It is hard to sell something to a department that doesn't want to buy it. So what we're finding is that the time is best spent on the departments who do want change and show how valuable the change is, and then use that as a way to lever the other teams that hadn't come around to it yet. Now, if it's a directive from the top, certainly having a structured requirements gathering process, and this is the perfect job for someone in a leadership role in IT and a business analyst. I think if leaders from other departments don't feel as though they're dealing with peers, sometimes they're less interested. So showing that this is important, right, and they're getting a high level of attention, I've seen that to be highly effective.
Great, thank you. And a good point there, starting with the departments that want to see the change. And so that will take a little burden of effort off whoever the sponsorship is, whether it's coming from IT or elsewhere, and then convincing the other departments, hey, this might be a good way to go. That's a terrific approach. So now we'll go around with another little round of questions, and we do have questions coming in, which we'll get to shortly. So I want to thank you for submitting those questions, and we will get there. So what's next for ESM at your organizations? I'll start with that one, and then I'm going to follow up with another question. And since you're kind of in the, Nick, you're kind of in the middle of things. You're right smack in the middle of changing things at your organization. So I'll start with you. What's the next step that you're going to do as you go down the ESM road?
Well, like I said, we're going to finish a pilot proof of concept that we have. We're going to use that as a vehicle to go on a roadshow throughout all the other departments, continue with the educational journey, and generate interest. And from there, really, it's going to become a prioritization. So my roadshow is going to identify eligibility of a department to use our service management platform or not. And if they are, they're on my hit list. Once I complete my roadshow, I'll have completed the analysis of our eligible departments. And then it's going to be sitting down with our senior leadership here and prioritizing the need. And that's going to become our order of implementation. What we're going to be doing here is establishing service management as a program. And really, we're going to be establishing a product team within that program. So there's going to be a product owner, a business analyst. We decided, even though we don't need it right now, we did hire a full-time system administrator on this. So that's what we're going to do, is build the team, prioritize the order of implementation, and then we're going to set the team off to implement. And it's going to be a multi-year program.
Great, thank you. Sabi, how about you? What's next for you? What's the next step?
You know, we'll continue to add more departments or more services do this. So as we continue to mature, also one of the things which we need to start doing is start measuring some of these services, right? Are we meeting the needs of our customer? Having those frequent conversations with our customers, making sure that we are still providing that value. Yes, we have implemented, but have we done any check back with them in terms of some metrics, right? Do we have any KPIs now defined which we can start measuring against and start measuring our progress, or seeing if we are constantly getting better and getting more mature? That is for sure. And then also another piece which we were thinking about is we need to have this process of continuous education, right? So what kind of training we should put in place as new employees come in? How do we get them trained in this ESM world? How can we train them in using the tool? So maybe some of the focus needs to be on building some of the training material right now so that it's easier for folks to adapt to the new change.
Great. And now I'm going to ask the big question, which is what's next? So as we know, these service management journeys don't have an end date. There's projects involved for sure, but by itself, enterprise service management isn't a project, an ongoing initiative that you really need to follow through on. So what, after you say, okay, we've achieved some degree of success in enterprise service management, what are you looking forward to, and how will enterprise service management enable you to get there? Asabi, I'll start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So the next thing which we're looking at is how can we provide that customer experience? How can we reduce the pain for them, either through self-serve or even integrating the tool with a chatbot, right? So that's one of the initiatives which we are looking at right now. We at Clackamas Community College, we have something called Innovation Fund. So, folks need to come up with some innovative idea and submit the funding request for that. So that's what I've done about a month ago. So now I'm waiting for that, seeing, okay, if we can get some funding for that, maybe we can do a proof of concept. Maybe we can do a pilot where we can integrate a chatbot with our tool here and build some processes around it and start helping those customers getting those experiences which they have been asking for some time.
Great, thank you. Nick?
Yeah, well, definitely continual improvement is something that is big and next and continual, really, within the IT organization. As I said, we finished our ITSM implementation for the most part in Q4. We didn't implement everything in the ITSM stack, but we have a lot left to do. So it's continuing to move out some of the other applications, but also to tune things in a little bit better, specifically our reporting. So that's on the IT side. Some other things that, I mentioned what we're going to do in terms of our enterprise scale, but really we're looking at some integrations too. And I've had some conversations we've started with Team Dynamics, and we'll continue on their iPaaS solutions, or perhaps just leveraging other areas within the existing APIs. But one thing that is of high interest is there's decent reporting in Team Dynamics, but like many of the folks on this webinar today, we have a really, really advanced BI organization and BI environment built out. So looking to do some integration with our Snowflake and Tableau environments, do some predictive analysis there. That would be nice. And then we're also looking at just the integration of what I call IT productivity and task management. So again, likely leveraging the Team Dynamics iPaaS or API. But developers love to use the next thing, so we need to do some integrations into things like Jira and Azure DevOps for some specific work that are done within some specific teams. And then my favorite thing is service automation. Once we can build out service management, once you have knowledge management, now you can put those two things together. And if you have orchestration and automation engineers, which we do, now we can start to really get fancy and start to automate a lot of these service fulfillment. So that really, for me, is the holy grail.
Great, thank you. And from your I'm sorry. All set? Okay. Andrew, I have a related question for you, which is what's next for Team Dynamics in terms of preparing for what happens as organizations like these progress and complete what they have in their current roadmap for enterprise service management? How is Team Dynamics preparing for the future?
Yeah, well, I think Sabi and Nick have touched on it. You know, the desire is to provide a quality, an extremely high quality service experience when it is needed by the customer, right? What does that mean? That means being able to support the customer through channels that they want to be supported through. So whether that's email or text or other interfaces, you know, you could say a bot interface, et cetera. It's important to be able to serve. The second is automation and integration, which Nick touched on. So we are finding tremendous opportunities to leverage the iPaaS platform, which is Integration Platform as a Service, cloud-based integration and automation tool set. And we've invested heavily in that because what we're finding is to provide service 24/7, 365, right, you have to automate processes. We're finding that not only does automating processes allow you to have that round-the-clock service for quite a few or a high percentage of your services, but it also improves satisfaction, and it does that in a couple ways. So the first is that if a process can be automated, right, you have as fast as it can technically happen response, right? Automating those processes, communicating with the customer. The second piece of this satisfaction equation is that now the people who used to be making these changes automatically, and I'll give you an example, something as simple as group permissions management is something that people do all the time. And an admin goes in, they open Active Directory, they find the group, they remove a user from one group, they add it to the next. Those people who used to be doing that can now address the higher priority critical issues that require a human being faster and more thoroughly. So now your user is getting a better experience all around. The other piece of this is that when you think about integration and automation, with all of the point solutions being deployed across the enterprise, now we might need to touch many solutions to automate a process or to pull data. So data becomes a big issue. So now your automation and integration strategy becomes really important because we have all these disparate sources of information or systems that we need to actually take action within. So the integration platform as a service, which is a core product of ours, those have become critical tools for the organizations trying to advance their service management practices. I mean, just absolutely critical going forward.
Great. Thank you so much for that perspective. We do have time for some questions, and we do have a few. Natalie, for your awareness, I'm seeing 2 currently. So I'm going to go ahead and start the questions. And I'm just going to put the ball in the air like a basketball game. I'm going to toss it up, and whoever feels motivated to answer the question, if I don't see you running away, I may point at you. But if you feel motivated to answer the question. And the first one is, are there ITSM, that is IT Service Management, domains that don't translate into the broader ESM program? Are there, there might be, as we mentioned earlier, some terminology or specifically some processes that don't translate very well. What changes are needed in the ITSM processes, such as service design, to make them appropriate to the business? Nobody wants to answer that one. Don't make me pick on you. No, Sabi, do you want to take a stab at that?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that one.
Thanks, Nick.
As I mentioned, I've done this in academic and enterprise organizations. And I'll just say right now, using my current employer and my last employer, so Ray Martin Flanagan and Ithaca College, I sniffed around every corner of both organizations, and I could not find a department that did not have a use case for a service management platform. Some of those departments may only have 1 or 2 services that they need to manage, but I can tell you I've been pretty thorough going through it, and I have not found a department that doesn't need this.
That's a good point, and that is one of the arguments for starting an enterprise service management program to begin with, right? To make sure that people are getting a unified experience. In fact, going back to some of the research that HDI did in previously, that 2018 report shows that 77% of the organization said that the reason that they were doing this was to improve the customer experience. So unifying things across the organization to improve services internally and externally as well. Sabi, do you want to comment on the whether or not ITSM processes translate for other business units, and how do you approach that?
Yeah, I will agree to that, to what Nick said. It's just maybe the terminology they don't understand. So you have to make it simple for them. Also, another piece which there is, what's the culture in that particular division or group? That also is an important factor in there. As there is a siloed approach, everybody doing their own stuff. So that I would like to add that as well.
Great. This is a specific question about budgeting. How do you approach this in your organization from a budgeting perspective? Some organizations, says the question, have each group pay for their own usage. Others will set it up so that IT essentially is provisioning the platform without any chargebacks. And this goes to Andrew. They specifically asked for you. As you consider the broader customer base of Team Dynamics, what model approach works best for widespread adoption?
Sure. So I think there are two approaches. If you have good executive sponsorship, and I think this is the ideal state, if you're trying to get your organization to change and think in terms of change to a service management mindset, the budget issues at the department level become a restriction. So the best organizations that we've seen attack this with good sponsorship is to essentially procure enough licenses, or there's a concept of a site or enterprise license, so the whole organization can use it. So you're taking that one constraint off the table, because if there's somebody dragging their feet, that is a very easy one. Well, we don't want to spend the money on it. Well, good news, right? The licensing's free for your department. Why don't we help you, right? That's a great approach. Now, if you don't have strong sponsorship or support, and HR is dying because of their service management processes. I've seen this many, many times. Convincing the VP of HR to invest some in the licensing to cover their department is a fine way to go if that's going to start building this case. So ideally, you have executive sponsorship. Someone with a purse string says, listen, this is something we're going to do. We're going to remove budget as a constraint. That's not going to be on the table because we need to do this, right? We'll have enough. The fallback is find the people who have the big enough pain where the cost of the license pales in comparison to the cost they're incurring due to not having a service management strategy or process or solution to support them.
That's a great point, because often the pain is great and they haven't looked at it until they get approached with, hey, we have a solution over here. What's your biggest pain point? Then they start thinking about, how many times last week did I have to do XYZ because of this? And so they start to see that as a pain point. Sabi, did you want to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to totally agree to what Andrew said, because that's the model which we are using. And that's what we started at Clackamas Community College was our VP of College Services, also quasi Chief Financial Officer. So IT is actually bought the licenses for everybody. And that really helps saying, hey, what pain point do you have? Because what it does is it reduces that barrier to bring another division or another group start using it. So definitely agree to that.
Great, thank you. This is a question that I have personal interest in. Someone asked, do any of these folks use OCM, Organizational Change Management? And if so, how early? I'm real interested in the answers to this one.
I can take, since it's a ball, Nick went for the first time, I will take it this time. So I joined Clackamas Community College about 9-10 months ago. So I haven't seen much OCM here. But in my previous organization, I spent about 15 years at City of Portland, another government entity. And that's where we were really, really active in using a OCM processes. And one of the model which we use is ProSize ad card model, right? Where you create the awareness, you create that desire, knowledge, and then train them so that you can retain those that knowledge. So that's a model which we use. But I am really hopeful that we'll start using some of those processes here at CCC. And they need to start pretty soon, very early.
Yeah,
Nick, did you
I'll
want to
chime
speak
in on
about
that as well. You are implementing significant change in many cases when you go about one of these journeys, and it was no different here. So within IT, we're kind of used to dealing with change, so I followed some very general, just like IT change practices. We have a much larger challenge out across the business, and something I mentioned privately to you, Roy, I'd like to talk to you about. We have a very large non-ITSM, non-ESM project that's going to be coming up here in our organization. And that's where I've made it very clear that this is going to fundamentally change and transform our business. And we need to take change management very seriously. And I'm promoting that we hire one of the most reputable change management consulting firms in the industry to come help us out with this. So I take change management very seriously, and you have to take that into consideration when you're changing how people work. And sometimes when you're taking away the tools that they currently work with and replace them with something else, you're going to cause some problems if you don't take that seriously step by step and follow a structured change management process.
My favorite quote about organizational change, and when there's a new IT initiative, especially, or service management initiative, happened at a meeting I was attending, and we were talking about who's working on what projects for the coming year from different organizations. And one of the people said, here's what happened at our service desk. We got a call after we just made this big change that we were implementing a whole new productivity suite. And somebody called in and said, yesterday, I knew how to do my job. Today, I don't. And so that kind of impact can be had on end users. And it's really tough for them to deal sometimes with the change. So thank you for thinking about the change management. This is a complex question. So I'll go through it really slowly. I don't know who asked, but it's a great question. What is your advice for balancing growth and expansion of the ESM program against continual improvement of the items that have already reached steady state? So you've got some service management initiatives or other projects that have reached steady state. You're going great guns. Now you have ESM and you've got to manage that. So how do you balance the growth and expansion of ESM against the continual improvement of other things? You can't run away. I will find you.
I'll throw in at that. I go back to it's education first. As we go through the journey with each department, we need to educate them with what they have, and we need to train them to be able to manage the platform on their own. We'll take the core system administration and IT, and we'll partner with Team Dynamics to keep the platform up and running and maintained properly. But when it gets down into the day-to-day administration, you need to teach the people how to fish on their own. And that's very critical to that. As far as the continual improvement goes, if you can teach the people what they have and you can get them on that spectrum, they will continue to do that. Then those intra-departmental collisions don't occur as much because everyone's off on their own path.
Great. Thank you so much. We're starting to get very short on time. So I'm just going to start to wrap up here and remind people to download the resources from the resource list. There's the 2018 HDI research on enterprise service management, and it does refer back to 2014 research, so you can compare those notes and see the directions that people have started to go. And also, there's a white paper there from Team Dynamics that you'll want to look at as well. So get those takeaways. Thanks for attending today. Download those resources, and please do take a moment to rate the webinar. It's important. It really helps HDI and Informa improve the webinars going forward. I'd like to thank our panelists, Sabi and Nick and Andrew, for your input during this. We never know what kind of questions are going to pop up, and you didn't have visibility into what I was going to ask you. So great job today. Thank you so much. And a special thanks to our sponsor, Team Dynamics. This webinar is copyright 2021 by Informa. Speakers today are solely responsible for their information and opinions expressed. Thanks again for attending, and have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.